Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the People's Power Hour in Lukman Nation here on Black Power Media. Lukman Nation, the most dangerous show on social media, on the most dangerous platform on social media. That's Black Power Media. What's up, everybody? It's me. I'm the People's Prophetess, Jackie Lukman. Thank you so much for joining me for another People's Power Hour. I am wrapping up regular production again of our shows in Lukman Nation. So I'm getting back into the swing of things after surgery, feeling good. I must say, I'm looking really good too. So I hope you all are doing really, really well. It's been a momentous day. It's been a day, right? And I'm going to get into a little bit of that. But first, I want to make sure that you are subscribed to Black Power Media if that is the platform through which you are watching right now. And even if you're not watching through Black Power Media, I'm going to need you to go to YouTube, go on over to Black Power Media and subscribe to Black Power Media so you can not just see all of the shows here in Lukman Nation, but you also get notified if you click the bell when you subscribe for when we are on live Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday morning from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. with the Remix Morning Show, your boom bap breakfast. You will also not miss any broadcasts of any show that's on Black Power Media. And there are lots of great shows, more shows coming. You don't want to miss episodes of Coco's show. You don't want to miss episodes of Dr. Jared Ball's show. You don't want to miss Kalanji's interviews. You don't want to miss nothing on Black Power Media. You don't want to miss Sundays on Sunday nights at 8 o'clock with Ear Doctor. You don't want to miss anything on Black Power Media because there's so much. Saturday afternoon with Balagoon and just so much stuff. You don't want to miss any of it. Please subscribe to Black Power Media. You can also support Black Power Media through Patreon at patreon.com/Black Power Media. But you can also support Lukman Nation through Patreon. I hate to have you split, but you can split between the two of us a little something. Break us both a little, break us both off a little something. And you can support Lukman Nation at patreon.com/Lukman Nation. All right. So, boy. I have been looking at the decisions from the Supreme Court over the past couple of days. Oh, I'm so sorry. Excuse me, y'all. Apologies. I didn't shout out y'all who have come in. Thank you so much. Alex Marquez Perez Munoz Diaz. Zara K, AMS, 40 J Blaze, Goddess Crew, 2Fs, Eric Berkeley, Miriam Francis, CB, Manny Nile, Easy D, Sugar Sham, Kai, Ricky Ryan, let's see, Geechee Yaw, hey baby. Let's see, who else we got in here? Quaker Anarchist, Tony 45, FU2. Let me go down. Let me make sure I got everybody. Everybody, thank y'all so much for joining me tonight. All right. These Supreme Court decisions. I want to say that I was surprised, but I wasn't. And I want to try to be, sympathetic to folks who were very upset about the Supreme Court decisions regarding race, college, higher education institutions using race as a factor in their admissions. The Supreme Court has ruled that they can't do that anymore. Um, I'm going to try. I'm going to try very hard to understand that people don't understand the kind of institution the Supreme Court is and always was. But that's why I like to kind of have these conversations to remind myself that not everybody has gotten to the point where I have, where I am not sitting here saying, oh, we need to expand the Supreme Court. We need to put more liberal justices on the Supreme Court. No, my position is the Supreme Court needs to be abolished. It needs to be done away with, because here's why I say this. Because the Supreme Court is a deeply undemocratic institution. Who voted for them people? Who voted for them? Did any of you vote for any of the justices on the Supreme Court? No. And I know people will say, and this is the argument that's coming from the Democratic circles now, well, elections have consequences. This is what happens when y'all didn't vote for Hillary Clinton in 2016. You didn't vote for a Democrat, so she could put liberal justices on the Supreme Court, and Trump got elected. And what happened? Look at what happened. Well, I seem to recall a whole bunch of people in this country voting for Barack Obama. I will readily admit I voted for that dude the first time when I was a lot more hopeful that he would be different from every other a white supremacist capitalist president, but he turned out to be exactly the same. So the second time around, you fool me once, you ain't fooling me twice. But I do seem to recall a bunch of people voting for that dude. And when it came time to put his justice on the Supreme Court, which was Merrick Garland, I believe. What did Ruth Bader Ginsburg say when she was asked to step down, to retire, so that Obama could replace her with a liberal justice? I'm using these terms because this is just the history of what happened. I'm not saying these justices are liberal in a positive way at all, in a way that's in any way useful whatsoever, because it's really not. But this is actually what happened. So what had happened? So what happened? When people always tell, look, the vote for president is all about the Supreme Court. Okay, well, people elected Obama. He for good or for ill, he wanted to put Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court. He asked Ruth Bader Ginsburg nicely, please retire so I can replace you with a liberal. And what did that have to say? Hell no. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg, instead of following the lead of the leader of the Liberal Party, instead of following the lead of Barack Obama and allowing him to secure a liberal spot on the Supreme Court, this heifer decides she's going to look out for her legacy. That's what she did. And she died on the Supreme Court. And then the Democrats decided that they wanted to anoint Hillary Clinton as their nominee after Donald Trump won, or after Obama. And then here comes Donald Trump running against Hillary Clinton, and people just remembered all the shitty things Hillary Clinton did and didn't want to vote for her. And she didn't run a real campaign. She believed that, look, she lost the nomination to Barack Obama. She lost the nomination to the secret Muslim, because let's not forget, we reminded you when she ran in 2016. Let's not forget that secret Muslim bullshit about Barack Obama, that came from Hillary Clinton. Yeah, that was a picture that was circulated by her campaign. So she was pissed off that she had to take a back seat to the Negro. And she just felt like the Democratic nomination was hers. It was her time. It was her turn to be the Democratic nominee for president. So the Democratic Party said, okay, there will be no challengers. Bernie Sanders comes with his insurgent campaign, which it wasn't socialist. I don't care how much he calls himself a Democratic socialist. It wasn't socialist, but it was better than what the Democrats were offering, and they crushed that thing. Oh, they absolutely crushed Bernie Sanders and his campaign completely. Went to court and sued to kick the Green Party off of ballots in some states. Oh, this was the Democrats. Yes. And then when Clinton doesn't win against Donald Trump because she doesn't run a campaign, she assumes that everyone just owes her their vote. She didn't promise to do anything for anybody because she felt like she ain't have to. She expected to be anointed the presidency, and she got up and shocked after her Pied Piper campaign that was run from her campaign that elevated the three worst Republicans, Donald Trump, who was one of them, actually gave Trump all this free press that put him on television in front of a bunch of people who probably wouldn't have paid too much attention to him otherwise if she didn't help. That's how Donald Trump got elected. It wasn't because Black people didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. It wasn't because, people did. Look, voter participation in this country has always been very, very low compared to other countries around the world with actually democratic elections. That's just true. Why? Because people don't believe in this system. I mean, that's pretty obvious. That should be pretty obvious by now, that the reason voter participation in this country, particularly in presidential elections, and sometimes it's even worse in midterm elections, people don't vote because they don't believe in this system. And that is in both political parties, because the Republicans are who and what they are. And they, I won't say they always have been, but the white supremacists are who and what they are, whether they've been Republicans or Democrats. And the Democrats, who are supposed to be the liberals to the conservatives, the opposition party, what have they done to protect the rights of people who have fought tooth and nail for the little bitty sliver of those rights that we have? None. Nothing. They haven't done anything. They haven't done anything to codify any of those rights into law. They haven't done anything to protect the rights that were hard fought, the little bit that we have. But every year they come along talking about, this is the most important election in our lifetime. Vote for this horrible, worthless piece of shit Democratic candidate for president, or else you're going to get this worse, horrible piece of shit Republican as president. And honestly, most people in this country are sick of that. And they may not have the political language to convey that they are tired of buying into the lesser evilism, voting for what they don't want and getting exactly what they don't want. People are tired of doing that. But here you have liberals already on Twitter and on social media. See, elections have consequences. If Black people had voted for Hillary Clinton, if the millennials hadn't wasted their vote on Bernie Sanders, if Jill Stein hadn't siphoned vote to what? So I was thinking about this. And I was thinking about the history first of all, the history behind affirmative action, which I didn't know, because I don't know everything, and I like finding out new stuff. And when I learn new stuff, I like to share it with you. But I was also thinking about it in the context of the history, kind of loosely, the history of the Supreme Court, but particularly like the history of the 14th Amendment, which seems to be what a lot of these Supreme Court decisions about any and everything fall under. And I hope I'm going to get to that soon. I hope I'm going to have time to get to that tonight. Okay, so I want to talk about the history of affirmative action real quick. And I'm just going to give you some highlights, but look out for the next volume of Black Agenda Report, because this will be a larger, longer, expanded article in Black Agenda Report next week. But I'm just going to give you some highlights so you get a little sneak peek. So, affirmative action. I did not know that affirmative action in higher education was not implemented by any law. It was something the colleges and universities voluntarily did. And I take issue with that word, because if they voluntarily did it when they did it, what would have stopped them from voluntarily not racially discriminating against college applicants before then? So it wasn't so much that they voluntarily did anything, they were compelled to act when a couple of other things happened. So a website called Best Colleges says that affirmative action policies came out of, obviously, the civil rights movement, right? But almost not really in the way we think of. The phrase itself, though, affirmative action, I did not know, was coined by an African American lawyer named Hobart Taylor Jr. You're going to have to look him up, who was asked by then Vice President Lyndon Johnson to review and revise a draft of an executive order, which would eventually become the executive order that Lyndon Johnson, the president, issues to end racial discrimination for government contractors for employment. I see you, Ricky. I'm sorry. Y'all get the next one. I promise. Y'all get the next one. They do. They fight over me. Hood Communist and Bar fights over me. And I gotta say, it makes a girl feel loved. Thank you. I'm gonna be better at sending Hood Communist my stuff and Bar my stuff, and be more egalitarian about it. Okay, so Lyndon Johnson, when he becomes president, he issues an executive order that tells government contractors that they have to, according to this phrase, affirmative action, they have to commit affirmative action. Like, they have to not just sit there and wring their hands about racial discrimination, and they certainly have to stop being racially discriminatory in their hiring. They have to take affirmative steps, affirmative actions to not racially discriminate against people they are hiring. So that phrase, affirmative action, came from Hobart Taylor Jr. So this executive order was issued by President Lyndon Johnson. At this time, Johnson is president because John F. Kennedy had been assassinated. The executive order that Johnson issued to contractors told them to take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are employed. Let me slow down because I've been talking all day. And that employees are treated during employment without regard to their race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. But that's not the only time that a president issued an executive order, used the power of the presidential pen to set precedent for the government. The second time this happened in regard to affirmative action was when Richard Nixon issued another executive order in 1969, which promised affirmative action to end discrimination in government employment overall. Lyndon Johnson's executive order was for government contractors. Richard Nixon's executive order was for the government, hiring in the government overall. Now, there's a whole lot behind why these men did what they did. Okay? And none of it is because they did these things out of the kindness of their hearts and they felt so deeply for the plights of Black people in America, and they loved Black people and they wanted to ensure equality for the Blacks. No, that's not, because Lyndon Baines Johnson, if people let's see, this is an example of Lyndon Baines Johnson and how much of a racist he was. I get that he signed the 1964 Civil Rights Act into law and the 1965 Voting Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act, I think, into law. I get it. And people like to, okay, he did those things. But Lyndon Johnson never saw a Black person that he did not want to call a nigga. And he called Black folks nigga all the time. He called Black folks nigga so much that he didn't call the Civil Rights Act the Civil Rights Act. He called it the nigga bill. He did. He really did. There's this example that of how much of a racist Johnson was that is published in a memoir of Lyndon Johnson's chauffeur, a man named Robert Parker. And the memoir Parker published is called Capitol Hill in Black and White. Capitol Hill in Black and White. And Robert Parker says that at one time, Lyndon Johnson asked him whether he'd prefer to be called by his name rather than boy, nigger, or chief. Think about this, y'all. Lyndon Johnson is asking his Black chauffeur, would you rather I call you by your name or boy, nigger, or chief? And Parker said, well, he would prefer to be called by his name. Johnson got pissed off, according to Robert Parker, and said, as long as you are Black and you're going to be Black till the day you die, no one's going to call you by your goddamn name. So no matter what you're called, nigga, you just let it roll off your back like water and you'll make it. Just pretend you're a goddamn piece of furniture. This is what Robert Parker said Lyndon Johnson said to him when he told Lyndon Johnson, after being asked, would he rather be called by his name instead of boy, nigger, or chief? This is who Lyndon Johnson was. So when people celebrate Lyndon Johnson signing these groundbreaking landmark pieces of civil rights legislation, and there's a whole nother discussion about what these pieces of legislation did and did not do, and the fact that they were undermined by the right wing from the day they were signed. Listen to me, y'all. I can't remember the day that these pieces of legislation were signed, but the day they were signed, the right wing began, they began organizing against these pieces of legislation before they were signed. And they have been organizing to dismantle them nonstop ever since. That's why we're where we are. That's part of the reason why we're where we are in this country right now. Part of the reason. I'll get to the other part in a bit. But this is who Lyndon Johnson was. So when you understand that this is the type of person that he was, and this is what he thought of Black people, and somehow I imagine that in his fevered, rattled, racism-addled brain, he's thinking that he's telling this man some good advice. Like he said to him, no matter what you're called, let it roll off your back like water and you'll make it. As if that's some type of motivational speech. He is telling this man, don't pay any attention to what people call you. Who? what adult in this country is going to be like, okay. But in this white racist mind, this very paternalistic advice is normal to him. He thinks this is, but this is Lyndon Johnson. So when you understand this is the type of person this man is, and this is what he thinks of Black people, do you think he signed any of these pieces of legislation out of the kindness of his heart and because he wanted to see Black people achieve equality instead of fuck no? He signed the legislation because he did not want us to burn this joint to the ground, which is what we were doing. What was going on in this country in 1962, 3, 64, 65? What US media will call riots, you and I being revolutionaries and understanding what our people were rising up against, we know they were uprising. They were uprisings all across this country. And most of those uprisings were sparked by racist police terrorism against an unarmed Black person. Or even if it was an armed Black person, it was still a case of extrajudicial police abuse or murder of Black people on the street. That's what was going on in this country after the assassinations of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., or around that time, by John F. Kennedy. The Klan was still lynching folks. And Black folks across this country, working class and poor Black people. Sorry, this was before King's assassination. Sorry, I'm getting my dates all mixed up. This is what happens when you look at the history. It's all in here, jumbled up like a little ball of yarn. That's what was happening in this country at that time. So Lyndon Johnson was like, I gotta calm these niggas down. Because that's what he said. He didn't say I have to do something to calm the Negroes. And no, Lyndon Johnson was like, I got to calm these niggas down. I think he famously told Dr. King that if he wanted him to do something about what Black people were rising up in the streets and angry about, that King had to make him do it. Well, Black folks made him do it. And then Richard Nixon is another story. And again, I'm not arguing the merits or the deficiencies of these pieces of legislation on this show, but I think I should on another show, because I think we have to be clear that these pieces of legislation themselves were very liberal leaning compromises of what Black people, of what the Black masses, the working class and poor Black masses were in the streets demanding. These pieces of legislation were not what we were asking for. These were the compromises. And I think we need to talk about that. We need to get into that in depth. And I think I'm going to need some experts to help me with that conversation, because we need to go somewhere farther than these legislations from here, from where we are in this political moment in this country. All right. So we need to be clear about where we came from so we don't do it again. All right. So that was Lyndon Johnson. Richard Nixon, a few years later, like I said, issued the executive order to implement affirmative action in all federal government hiring. Power of the presidential pen. Just flat out did it. Did Richard Nixon do this because he wanted to do better by the Negroes or the niggers than Lyndon Johnson did? Of course not. You know why? Because Richard Nixon, and I didn't know this about Nixon until I was researching for this article. Richard Nixon believed that there was a legitimate racial hierarchy to IQ. Like, he believed that white people were inherently at the top of the IQ ladder, And Asians were a little bit below the white people, and Black people and Latinx people were way on the bottom of that innate IQ ladder. And he believed this based on the theories that tied IQ to race that were propagated by Richard Herrnstein and Arthur Jensen. And yes, Richard Herrnstein was the co-author of the notorious book The Bell Curve, which lays out this racist ass theory of Black people just naturally genetically have low IQ and white people naturally genetically have higher IQ. Asians are in the middle. Well, not in the middle. Asians are closer to white people, but Black people and Latinx folks and indigenous folks, they're way down on the bottom. Richard Nixon believed this. He honestly believed this. And he is documented in a previously secret recording of a conversation that he had with, guess who? Daniel Patrick Moynihan. That's right, the racist prick who wrote the Moynihan Report, telling Moynihan that not only did he believe that Black people innately, genetically just had low IQs, but he also believed that African leaders in African countries, because they have low IQs, they were incapable of governing themselves. And he said, I don't want to say that they can't govern themselves, but that they're not very intelligent, and it's better not to know these things. Like he was burdened by having this knowledge that Black people are genetically, intellectually inferior to white people. Richard Nixon believed this. So now that you understand the type of person Richard Nixon was and what he felt about Black people, you think he issued this executive order because he wanted to make sure Black people got equal opportunity in the federal government? Get the heck out of here. No, there was a reason Richard Nixon issued this executive order, and it was a strategic reason for him. And it was a strategic reason that we continue to suffer under to this very day through this petit bourgeois, Black middle class, hustler, striver, earn your liberation, shucking and jiving Negroes, Black capitalists. These people we are struggling with today are the legacy of Richard Nixon and the reason he issued that executive order. But we're going to talk about that a little more in another show. And I'm going to lay that out a little bit more in the article. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on how affirmative action itself came to be in the United States. So what happened after these two executive orders were issued by Johnson and then Nixon, colleges in the United States then said, oh, maybe we should do something about the fact that we have been racially discriminating against Black people who have been applying to our institutions all this time. This is 1969. Colleges and universities, if they were not HBCUs in this country, were mostly white up until that time. So in 1969, colleges and universities decide, okay, we're going to apply our own affirmative action programs. There was no law passed to make them do this, no executive order. They just saw what was done at the presidency and they're like, yeah, I guess we should stop discriminating against people ourselves. And as soon as they did that, as soon as colleges and universities started implementing their own affirmative action programs, what happened? The white kids lost their minds. That's what happened. As soon as in 1969, colleges and universities began to implement their own affirmative action programs, the lawsuits against those programs happened almost immediately. The first lawsuit challenging affirmative action on college campuses happened in 1971, just 2 years after colleges and universities began implementing their own affirmative action programs in 1969. Just to it just took it only took 2 years for the white students to think up the idea of reverse racism, because that is the reason the first challenge to affirmative action was based on. And it was, the lawsuit was filed by a white student named Marco DeFunis, who filed a lawsuit against the University of Washington Law School, citing reverse racism as the reason for his being rejected from that law school. Here's the thing, though. DeFunis was eventually accepted to somebody else's law school because he went on to get a law degree. And by the time his case got to the Supreme Court, he was one semester away from, graduating from law school. I don't think it was University of Washington, but it was some other law school. But think about this. As soon as colleges and universities in the country decided, colleges and universities that were practically not admitting Black students at all, and if they were admitting any Black students, it was maybe 50. The average, maybe, I don't know, the average, median, mean, whatever you want to phrase you want. I know they have different meanings, but the average enrollment on college campuses in the US is maybe 5,000-6,000 students. I know there are some colleges with like 20,000 students. There are smaller colleges, so I'm just spitballing here. But if that's your average college enrollment, 6,000 students, and historically you just got up to admitting maybe 50 Black students, where by 1969, where before maybe 1960, you weren't admitting any Black students. You might have had one or two, but maybe in 1969, you had 50 Black students. And because you implement these new affirmative action policies, now the enrollment of Black students on your college campus has doubled. Well, you've only admitted 100 Black students. You just admitted 50 more. That's 50 100 Black students out of 5,000 or 6,000. So white people across this country were pissed off because Black enrollment on college campuses doubled. But we're not talking like it was half of the student body. We're literally just talking like if colleges and universities had an enrollment of 100 Black students, then maybe after they implemented their affirmative action programs, maybe there were 100 more Black students, 200 Black students. White kids and their parents, I'm not just going to blame it on the kids, white kids and their parents were pissed off that all these extra Negroes were taking the spots of their children. That's what this was. So the lawsuits happened immediately. So this DeFunis lawsuit in 1971 was dismissed by the Supreme Court because DeFunis eventually got admitted to somebody's law school and graduated with a law degree. Then in 1975, Harvard's Associate Dean of Admissions said something that was very important that I don't think people understand is very key and central to how we, and I mean we people who live in the United States, understand affirmative action or think about affirmative action to this day. Most people have a very negative view of affirmative action, and that is by design, because that is how the campaign to dismantle affirmative action that these white kids and their parents and their conservative, reactionary lobbyist friends and politicians and whatnot frame the discussion. They never framed the discussion to say that affirmative action is a way for this institution to take proactive steps to correct centuries of exclusion and racial discrimination against Black people and other but particularly Black people. They never said that. They always said that affirmative action was an unfair advantage given to Black people that gave them a preferential place in the university that would otherwise have gone to a qualified white applicant. That was the argument. And I remember hearing these arguments when I was in middle school, when I was thinking about applying to college. You don't want to be an affirmative action applicant because you don't want to be seen as taking the place of a qualified white student. So the implication was that Black students who were admitted through affirmative action efforts of universities were not qualified. And this framing of affirmative action was also how affirmative action was talked about in employment, in the government, and in civilian society. So this is why today we have a very completely incorrect, ahistorical, and very negative attitude about affirmative action, because it has never been framed in popular discourse as a remedy to the centuries of discrimination against Black people in particular. It has always been framed as preferential treatment given to Black people that is unfair to otherwise qualified white folks. And in 1975, Harvard's Associate Dean of Admissions, David Lee Evans, complained about this pervasive belief that, quote, and this is exactly what he said, semi-literate Blacks are being accepted at the expense of white geniuses. This is what David Evans said about this ridiculous belief about affirmative action, that semi-literate Blacks are being accepted at the expense of white geniuses, which was not true. And it didn't matter that it wasn't true. People still believed it, and they still do to this day. Whenever you talk about companies that have all of these people, but they can't hire any Black people in their corporate office, in upper management, there are no Black supervisors. There are plenty of Black line employees, workers, hourly employees, but there are no Black supervisors. There are no Black salaried employees. There's nobody Black in management. There's nobody Black on the board of directors, and the CEO is absolutely not Black. Nobody in marketing is Black. Nobody in communications is Black. There may be a Black person in HR, but usually there is not. Ain't nobody Black in HR. And when people point that out, then you get all these white people who are like, well, I know someone who worked in HR who had to hire an unqualified Black. They're lying. They're lying. They're lying. First of all, if anybody who works in HR is telling people what goes on in HR, they're fucking breaking the law. They're breaking the law. You're not supposed to do that. Second, isn't it interesting how these people always know somebody who hired some unqualified Black? It comes from this racist ass trope about affirmative action that the reactionaries created, all because of affirmative action programs that were implemented through presidential executive order in the federal government, and affirmative action programs on college campuses. And these stereotypes about affirmative action persist today. This is why people who claim that they're progressive, I don't even know what that means anymore, are celebrating this Supreme Court ruling because they're saying things like, admissions based on race are not fair. But the admission is not based just on race. It never has been based just on race. Universities, colleges and universities were not snatching just any old Black folks off the street and saying, here, come go to Harvard. That's not what was happening, y'all. Just like companies were not hiring a bunch of unqualified Black folks off the street saying, here, come be our CEO. Come be our vice president of marketing. We got a quota to meet. That's always how it was framed. But that didn't happen in real life, and it didn't matter that it didn't happen in real life. That's what people believe. Why do people believe that? Because America is a racist country, always has been. Racism and white supremacy are like, they're the unofficial religion in this joint. It's not difficult for people to believe this. Ugh. So, and the interesting thing about this misconception, about this racist stereotype about affirmative action, is that it automatically assumes that the people who are harmed are geniuses, that the white people who are denied opportunity because these ignorant, knuckle dragging Neanderthal ape-like black people are allowed into the universities and colleges, that if these cretins weren't allowed in, the white geniuses would be allowed in. But why was the assumption always that the white people were qualified to be admitted to? Why was the assumption always that the white people who would automatically be qualified to get the job, that a black person had? That's just another example of the white supremacist ideology baked into the foundation of this country. That narrative, that trope, was that easy to not just cook up in response to a few more black people being admitted to colleges and universities, but that it has persisted all this time. Okay, so now this is where I think we can talk about the Supreme Court. Boy. So before I talk about the Supreme Court, let me come in here and see what y'all are saying, because sometimes y'all have some of the best conversations in this chat. Why not learn is actually absolutely correct. And this is the funny thing about this ruling, because I want to say that it's a double-edged sword, but it's actually not. It's actually not. It is absolutely true that white women have benefited more from affirmative action than black people have. That's true. But to ensure that white women do not stop receiving the benefits of affirmative action, this Supreme Court ruling specifically says that race cannot be considered in college admissions anymore, at all, in any part of college admissions. Applicants themselves can talk about their race in their essays that they submit, but the university cannot award like extra points or however that's done. The university, the institution, cannot use race in any way, as a part of their criteria for accepting students. So let me address this. This sentiment annoys me quite a bit, if I'm understanding what you're saying. The fact that race is not scientific, so it's not something that matters. We're trying to impute logic to people who have based an entire ideology and system of oppression that built a nation on something that is completely illogical. You can't reason with these people. It does not matter that race is not scientific. It doesn't matter that race is not real. Racial discrimination did not happen on any other Okay, if I'm taking you out of context, please explain what you mean, because I don't understand why making the point that race is not scientific matters at all in this discussion. It doesn't. As a matter of fact, bringing up the fact that race is not scientific, it really doesn't matter in any material context when we're talking about the way that race was used to deny human rights and legal rights to people in this country. And I get you were talking to somebody else. I just want us to stop saying that. Because when we're talking about the ways that white supremacists and capitalists used race to oppress people, they oppressed people, they discriminated against people because of something that was entirely unscientific, doesn't really exist, isn't really real, but they did it anyway. So it's really, really a real thing. What was done is a real thing, and we have to contend with that. And I think we have to contend with that in the material reality in which it existed. And still exists. So I apologize if I took you out of context, but I just have this weird visceral reaction to people who the race is not a real thing. Okay. All right. It's not real, but racism sure the fuck is. So now let's talk about the Supreme Court. And this is why whether race is scientific or not doesn't matter, because the Supreme Court has ruled in the past, in the Dred Scott decision, that a human being of a designation of a thing that doesn't exist called a white man doesn't have to respect the rights of another human being of another designation that doesn't exist called a black man. Does it matter that white and black as races aren't really real? Not to the Supreme Court, it didn't. Not in the Dred Scott case, it didn't. The Dred Scott decision, let me hold on. I had it in here somewhere. What did I do with it? Oh, here it is. In March of 1857, the United States Supreme Court, led by Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, declared that all blacks, slaves as well as free, were not and could never become citizens of the United States. It didn't matter to him that the racial designation of black didn't really exist, was a made-up thing. They based legal precedent on it. The court also declared the 1820 Missouri Compromise unconstitutional, thus permitting slavery in all of the country's territories. Taney, a staunch supporter of slavery and intent on protecting Southerners from Northern aggression, wrote in the court's majority opinion that because Scott was black, he was not a citizen and therefore had no right to sue for his legal rights. The framers of the Constitution, he wrote, believed that blacks, quote, had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit. He was bought and sold and treated as an ordinary article of merchandise and traffic whenever profit could be made by it. That was the Dred Scott decision rendered by the United States Supreme Court in 1857. So this is the Supreme Court. This is the legacy of the Supreme Court ruling, interpreting law based on something that is very unscientific, completely made up by white people with the expressed intention of discriminating against and oppressing people they determined were this thing called black. Ruling on this arbitrary thing, interpreting law and basing legal precedent on this thing that we keep saying is arbitrary, but it's clearly not. it has been made real by U.S. law, by the Supreme Court, by the Constitution of the United States. And we live the reality of it through these laws in this country interpreted by the Supreme Court. How else has the Supreme Court ruled in cases of racial discrimination against African descended people? Well, let's see. Let me go to Plessy v. Ferguson. In 1892, Louisiana enacted the Separate Car Act, which required separate railway cars for blacks and whites. In 1892, Homer Plessy, who was 7/8 Caucasian, Homer Plessy was, agreed to participate in a test to challenge the Separate Car Act. He was solicited by the Comité des Citoyens, or Committee of Citizens, a group of New Orleans residents who sought to repeal the act, the Separate Car Act. They asked Plessy, who was technically black under Louisiana law, but remember he was 7/8 Caucasian, to sit in a whites-only car of a Louisiana train because he was 7/8 Caucasian. The railroad cooperated because it thought the act imposed unnecessary costs via the purchase of additional road cars. The railroad company did not want to do this segregation thing because they're like, we're going to have to spend money to buy all these extra cars, and we ain't fitting to do that. So, yeah, let's go along with challenging this law. When Plessy was told to vacate the whites-only car, he refused and he was arrested. At the trial, Plessy's lawyers argued that the Separate Car Act violated the 13th and 14th Amendments. The judge found that Louisiana could enforce the law insofar as it affected railroads within its boundaries, and Plessy was convicted. So segregation in public transportation was upheld in Plessy v. Ferguson, according to the U.S. Supreme Court. This is the Supreme Court. This is the legacy of this court. And I know people want to say, well, the Supreme Court, we passed the 14th Amendment. Well, okay. Let's kind of look at the 14th Amendment. Now, you can go down kind of a rabbit hole with the 14th Amendment, and we don't have that kind of time tonight. But I'm going to have to do a show on just the 14th Amendment, because it is a fascinating examination into how everybody else has been able to use the 14th Amendment to establish their rights under the law, except for the people that the amendment was passed to grant citizenship to. And that was the descendants, and that was Africans who were formerly enslaved and their descendants. So I was just looking, just randomly, looking at a part of the 14th Amendment that deals with education. And I'm going to share my screen now so you can see what I see. So I don't want you to accuse me of making stuff up. You can accuse me a lot of things. Taking people out of context, I'm sorry. Being overly emotional, being petty, apologies. But I don't want people to accuse me of making things up. So this is the 14th Amendment, section 1.812, sub point 4. There are that many sections to the 14th Amendment. This is education, opportunity, wealth, and equal protection. How many sections are there to the 14th Amendment? Let me just show you real quick. We all think that the 14th Amendment is just this right here. This is all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. But that's not all there is to the 14th Amendment, because it's actually broken down into sections that deal with citizenship, privileges or immunities, and corporations, the Bill of Rights, procedural due process, civil cases, criminal cases post-trial, state taxes, other contexts, substantive due process, economic, non-economic, abortion, medical care, due process limits on state action, personal jurisdiction, state taxation, void for vagueness, equal protection, race-based classifications, generally, segregation in education, segregation in other contexts, facially non-neutral laws benefiting racial minorities, voting rights, non-race-based classifications, gender-based classifications, non-suspect classifications, economic regulation and taxing power, sexual orientation-based classification, wealth-based distinction, fundamental rights. And then there's a section 2, the section 3, section 4, section 5. And all of these, I think, are related to legal challenges to different sections of the 14th Amendment. Fascinating. So when I was looking up the Supreme Court cases in regard to education, let me go back so I can get to my access to courts and wealth. Go back, and equal protection under education. I think this is very important to know. So there was a case called San Antonio School District v. Rodriguez, in which people sued to get rid of the system that exists in 49 states in this country that finances school districts out of property taxes. And the reason this lawsuit was brought by Rodriguez, the plaintiff, was because they argued that the effect was that the funds available to local school boards within each state were widely divergent, because places in the state where rich people live, they have more, there's more property owned, so there are more property taxes. Where mostly poor people live, most of those people don't own homes. The property taxes may be low if they do. And people who live in apartments don't pay property taxes, but their kids go to public schools too. So they don't get as much funding from property taxes as jurisdictions with wealthier citizens who pay more in property taxes. That was the argument. But the Supreme Court of the United States said that there was neither a suspect classification nor a fundamental interest involved, that the system must be judged by the traditional restrained standard, and that the system was rationally related to the state's interest in protecting and promoting local control of education. Don't ask me what that means, other than we don't see anything wrong with the way the system is. And the court further explains that by saying, the individuals or groups of individuals who constituted the class discriminated against in our prior cases shared two distinguishing characteristics. Because of their impecunity, look that up, don't know what it means, they were completely unable to pay for some desired benefit. And as a consequence, they sustained an absolute deprivation of a meaningful opportunity to enjoy that benefit. The court says that no class had been identified here, and more importantly, no one was being absolutely denied an education. The argument was that it was a lower quality education than that available in other districts. Even assuming that to be the case, the Supreme Court said it did not create a suspect classification. So even though the Supreme Court said that, even though, yeah, okay, it might be true that poor people receive a lesser quality education than people in a wealthier district who pay higher property taxes, they're not classified. They weren't classified as being suspected of being outright denied an education. It's just a lower quality education. Thank you, 2Fs. Impecunity means having little money. They po. This was the best part, the best worst part of this Supreme Court decision, where the Supreme Court of the United States says that a right to education is not expressly protected by the Constitution, continued the court. They said this. The Supreme Court has already ruled that a right to education, it's not a right protected by the Constitution, nor should it be implied simply because of its undoubted importance. Just because you should have an education to be able to make reasonable decisions in this country, it doesn't mean, it's important. It doesn't mean it's a right. The quality of education increases the effectiveness of speech or the ability to make informed electoral choice. The Supreme Court right here admits that the better quality education you have, the better your right to speech, the more right to speech you have in this country, and allegedly the better ability you have to make informed electoral choices. But the judiciary is unable to determine what level of quality would be sufficient. Moreover, the system under attack did not deny educational opportunity to any child, whatever the result in that case it might be. It was attacked for providing relative differences in spending, and those differences could not be correlated with differences in educational quality. That's a lie. But this was the Supreme Court decision in Rodriguez versus the Antonio School District, or the Antonio School District versus Rodriguez, which was brought based on the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. So when we understand that education is adjudicated in this country based on that state denying or depriving any person of life, liberty, or property without due process, or denied to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. When we look at the Supreme Court's ruling in previous affirmative action cases in higher education, we should have seen this coming. The Supreme Court has already ruled under the 14th Amendment that education is not even a right in this country. And an equal education, states don't have to provide an equal education to people in different economic brackets just because people who pay more property taxes get better quality education for their kids, and people who pay less property taxes get lesser quality education. That's just, Supreme Court said that's not a problem. So when you consider how the Supreme Court has ruled in other affirmative action cases, this recent ruling makes sense. So in 1978, the Supreme Court banned quotas in affirmative action in higher education in a case saying that you can't just set aside spots for a specific number of Black people in particular. This was never really imposed for any other group of people that were included in the affirmative action efforts to not discriminate against people based on race, gender, sex, sexual orientation, creed, or anything. Nobody said anything about quotas set aside for anybody else except for Black people. So in 1978, the Supreme Court ruled against quotas in affirmative action in higher education. In 2003, the Supreme Court told colleges that they could consider race as part of a holistic view, but they could not assign minority applicants a set number of points because of their race. Then in 2014, 4 years later, so that was 2007, the Supreme Court then prohibited public high schools from using race as a tiebreaker in some of these public, high-performing high schools where, kids had to apply to get into. Yeah, there was that. In 2014, the Supreme Court upheld a Michigan ban on banning affirmative action at state universities. And Michigan wasn't the only state in the country that has banned affirmative action in state universities before this Supreme Court ruling, because in California, where is it? In California, the California Supreme Court, so sorry, California voters, that's what I want to say, voted to ban affirmative action in state colleges. I forget the year, but when the referendum was put on the ballot to repeal the ban in 2020, the repeal of the ban failed. Why was the ban put on the ballot to be repealed? Because once the ban was implemented in California to ban affirmative action, what do you think happened? Black and Latinx enrollment in public universities in California plummeted, just absolutely in the toilet. So the ballot referendum might have been, I think 96 is correct. Under saying elsewhere, yes, I think 96 is correct. If that's incorrect, somebody correct us here. So in 2020, when the referendum was put on the ballot to repeal the ban on affirmative action, it failed. Why? Because people still believe that ridiculous racist trope about affirmative action being excuse me, about affirmative action being an unfair preferential treatment for unqualified Black people that denies qualified white people an opportunity. So when you understand these things about the Supreme Court and the history of the discourse around affirmative action in this country, the political history of affirmative action, excuse me. This smoke has got my sinuses a mess. So when you understand the political history of affirmative action, you should have seen this coming. There should be no surprise in this. And I'm so glad. Thank you, Ricky, because this is exactly where I was going. A part of the other part of the reason we are at this point in the history of this country is because instead of there being a coordinated and equally powerful, equally organized, equally energized, and equally committed effort to correct the narrative about affirmative action, to deal with and address the reasons that affirmative action was and is necessary still, and to debunk the lies that were told about affirmative action, that didn't happen. You had a few people, few so-called radicals, trying to tell the truth about affirmative action. But by and large, the liberals, the Democrats, the well-meaning white people, and the petit bourgeois Black misleadership class, who themselves benefited from the affirmative action policies, but their attitude was, well, I got mine. I don't know what the rest of y'all gonna do. That's also why we're here where we are. Because the organizing done to dismantle affirmative action was intense. And it wasn't something that was done like publicly. They didn't go, the reactionaries didn't go around, running around announcing to the world what they were doing. They just quietly went about their way, spreading their message and gospel to everybody who would listen. And was there a commensurate effort from the liberals, the so-called opposition party, to these reactionaries, these conservatives, to that? No. Instead, what you had among the political liberal class, the politicians, the Democrats, was every effort to reach some type of bipartisan compromise with these people. That's why I hate bipartisanship, because bipartisanship does not mean we're going to, try to negotiate in good faith and come to a resolution that we both agree on that's beneficial to everyone. No, it's always capitulation to the reactionaries. Always. Always. Exactly. Precisely. And this is the same thing I'm going to say about Roe versus Wade, about CRT, about student loans, everything. The Voting Rights Act, everything. Everything the right wing is doing now. It's not because Donald Trump installed some conservative justices on the Supreme Court. This is the result of literally decades of committed, unrelenting, laser-focused organizing by the right wing in these countries to dismantle every single progressive policy that has ever been passed. And this didn't start with the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. This actually started with the New Deal. This started with the New Deal, and it actually started with a failed business plot against Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That's where this really started. The capitalists and the reactionaries wanted to overthrow Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and they hatched a plot. I'm gonna have to have Dr. Gabriel Rockhill on the show one day to talk about this business plot, because it is more relevant to today than we understand. But when they couldn't pull off the coup against FDR and they couldn't stop the New Deal, they immediately began to organize to dismantle every single piece of the New Deal. This is why the fight against Social Security continues today. It didn't start with these liberals, Obama saying we need to cut back on Social Security, we need to privatize Social Security. It didn't start with the Republicans, the modern Republicans. It started when the New Deal was implemented. Okay. So we're here now. No college or university can use race in any aspect of their admissions, with one exception. With one exception. Guess what the exception is? You're not gonna believe it. For those of you who know, don't tell. I want people who don't know to guess. There is an exemption. There is an exception in this Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action in higher education. And that people who know what the exception is, shh. I want people to guess. I want people who don't know to take a wild guess at what institutions are exempted in this country from implementing affirmative action to achieve diversity in their enrollments. Nope, not legacy, James. I'm gonna wait because it's good. Ding, 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 ding. Military institutions. That's right. The Supreme Court ruled, who was that who got that? Oh, I think that was, Franny. 2 F's, absolutely right. The military. The Supreme Court ruled today that no institution of higher learning in the United States that still uses affirmative action can use affirmative action. No institution of higher learning in the United States that still uses affirmative action can use it any longer, with the exception of military institutions, because they said it was important to ensure that there is diversity in military institution enrollments, but diversity in public and private institution enrollments, that, fuck that. Oh boy. So the idea that these people are like, well, gee, when the Black enrollment, when the Latinx enrollment at these institutions of higher learning in this country plummet, I mean, these people, they cannot say, oh, we didn't know that would happen. That's not what they knew it would happen. And they understand what they're doing. They know that they are denying access, equal access to higher education to historically discriminated against people. They know what they're doing. This is the reactionaries' long game. This is the conservatives' long game. This is the white supremacist capitalist long game. Because if you're educated, even if you're educated a little bit in some of these liberal institutions, if you're educated, there's only so much oppression you're going to take. They can't keep you in these low-wage jobs if you have some kind of a degree. I mean, okay, so there's that. So let me see what kind of questions y'all got. Thank you, Random Thought. You're right. You're absolutely right. Thank you for that correction. The first, and I remember learning that there were civil rights acts before the 1954 civil rights. I did not know. A few years ago, and I was like, what? There was a civil rights act that was passed during Reconstruction? Yes, there were several. And the reactionaries then, the white supremacists then, they fought. Well, that was the whole point behind the end of Reconstruction, the destruction of Reconstruction. It was the reaction to the progress that formerly disenfranchised people had made. That's what reactionary means. People who react negatively to progress. That's why they're called reactionaries. Thank you for that correction, Random Thought. I appreciate you. So Ricky has a question. What does it mean for Jack and Jill legacy kids and Black celebrity children? Did they still receive special treatment? That is a very good question. And it's a question I don't have an answer to, because if the legacy student is a legacy student because of their membership in Jack and Jill, which is an organization for specifically Black people of a certain class, of a certain upper class, then I would guess that they would be denied admission too. They can't, under the admonition from the Supreme Court that race cannot be used in higher education admissions. I don't think that Jack and Jill legacy helps them. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think when the Supreme Court says race cannot be used in admission, I think that might be the only case where legacy admissions, which nobody has a problem with, unless, of course, the legacy is based on a racially specific organization. I hadn't thought of that. I'm going to have to think more of that and actually get an answer, because I could be wrong. I don't think they can use class specifically, but they're going to have to probably start giving money to the university if they didn't. And I'm not sure that I don't know. I'm just guessing right now. That's oh man. That is a brain tickler. Ooh. Look at what you did, 2 Fs. I think this that could be a good addendum. Okay. So this thing is going to be a mess. So back to the issue of white women and affirmative action. White women have benefited more from affirmative action, but because this Supreme Court ruled that only race cannot be used in determining higher education admissions, women can still be given admission through affirmative action policies geared for diversifying campus enrollments by including more women. Only race. So I really feel like this was a this seems to me to be a very specific, obviously doesn't seem to me, it's a very obvious response to any progress on addressing the material harms created by racial discrimination. That is a good question, Yipper99. I do not know, but I will find out. And we're going to have to do a part 2 for this. We're going to have to do a part 2 for this because y'all have asked 2 questions that I don't have answers to right now, but I'm going to have to get them and I'm going to bring them back to you. I don't know. I think there are, but I'm not sure. So okay. What does this mean? What does this mean? This means that if we are not organizing, if we are not organizing, we will continue to be at the mercy of this white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal, settler colonial system that was never, ever designed to recognize or respect any rights that we have. Never. We should never be surprised that the Supreme Court ever rules to restrict or deny our rights or our equal access to whatever it is in this society, because the Supreme Court was not established to protect our rights. And the Supreme Court does not exist today to interpret the Constitution in a way that will protect or uphold or establish or expand our rights. We are going to have to do that. We're going to have to do that through organizing to overturn, upend, destroy the system that this Supreme Court protects. There is no way out of it. I am not sure what people are thinking can be done through voting still. When, like I said, people voted for Barack Obama, and look what happened to your precious Supreme Court pit. You had 2 of the most racist presidents, Johnson and Nixon, who for their own strategic and what's the word I'm looking for their own reasons, implemented executive orders to establish affirmative action. But this president, he can't issue an executive order to do anything, to protect anything. He doesn't know what an executive order is. Barack Obama controlled the White House. The Democrats controlled the Senate and the House of Representatives. And he couldn't issue an executive order to do shit. Nothing, not a thing. So what What else? What do you all what is the argument about continuing to vote to save us from these people? How are you still having that argument? And I'm not sitting here telling people not to vote. You do what you feel like you need to do. But now should be the time that we stop throwing this accusation at people that elections have consequences, not voting has consequences. How has voting protected the rights of the people who keep voting, hoping that somebody is going to be elected into office who protects our rights, and they keep not doing it? How long we going? This system is not designed to recognize or protect or expand the rights of the people. So the people have to take it upon ourselves to create a society that does. There is no other way, folks. There is no reform that can be implemented in this system to make any of this any better. There is only revolution. That's it. And that's not something that's going to happen tomorrow. That may not happen in the next year, may not happen in the next 5 years. But in the meantime, in between now and then, what we must be doing is organizing. And if you are not in an organization, that's where you need to be. Because I don't care how y'all feel about organizations. These reactionaries, they're not on social media whining and moaning about, I don't like this organization because they got gays in it. I don't like this organization because of the trans people. I don't like this organization because of the blah, blah, blah. No, they just find the people that they like based on their ideologies, and they get to work. They don't do a whole lot of broadcasting. They draw who they draw, and they will fight in the streets with who they fight. What y'all doing though? What y'all doing? You are fighting against people who are all oppressed by the same system. And you wonder why. You wonder why we ain't winning nothing. You wonder why. Okay, so I think that's all I got to say tonight. I tried not to come in here feeling a certain kind of way, but I did anyway. And I apologize for taking that earlier comment out of context. But please, man, we gotta, this argument that race is a social construct and it's not a real thing. I don't care. I don't care, and neither does the Supreme Court. Never has cared. They know it's not a real thing. They still base laws on it. So thank you so much. I appreciate that. You know, honestly, I get on here sometimes and I have my little talking points mostly. I mostly have my stuff organized, but today I kind of didn't because I had a whole bunch of other stuff going on. And I just sometimes I just wonder, like, am I just running my mouth? Just like, am I making sense? Because at some point, it's all just kind of like stream of consciousness. And this is something that I noticed that I did well, I actually didn't notice that I did it. Abdus noticed that I did it. And I would I'm crazy with notes. I love notes. And I have my little script and I've got my 2 screens. So I got my stuff and I'm looking and I'm going and I'm tabs and it's great. And at some point, I just ignore all that shit. And it's just, I'm just going off a stream of consciousness. And he said to me one time, why do you spend so much time on all these notes when half the time you don't even read from them? And I think he kind of didn't realize that because I put them together, I actually kind of remember most of them. But then I always think of 2 or 3 other things that I didn't think of when I was putting my notes together that are connected, that always make me go, I need to do another show on this because this is another thing. So that's how it is. But you know, I appreciate y'all. Yeah, there's going to be a part 2 to this because there are parts of this, the questions that you all ask that I don't have the answers to, that I would love to find the answers to. They're fascinating. I want to do a show on the business plot of, what year was that? 1930. I have a hard time remembering years, but it was during FDR's administration. I want to have Dr. Gabriel Rockhill on for that show, because can't nobody tell that story like that dude can. It's great. And make the connections to today. I definitely want to talk about how this ruling impacts military academy recruitment and what that means for us, what that means for working class and poor Black people. So maybe a part 3 where we're going to talk about the expanding poverty draft and how this impacts U.S. imperialism, what this means for U.S. imperialism, because it does. Yeah, a lot more. And that's just for the People's Power Hour. Here's some exciting news that I wanted to keep until the very end. I am bringing back Imprint of Imperialism because I really miss talking about imperialism on the continent with people. I really miss getting deep into these things going on the continent, really hyper laser focusing on them. So I'm bringing back Imprint of Imperialism in Lukman Nation. It will be on the first Friday of every month, and I'm working on my first guest, so stay tuned. Second good thing, exciting thing, new thing happening in Lukman Nation. I am going to have a new segment. I'm trying to make this thing as easy as I can for myself, so I don't have to think about a bunch of stuff to talk about every week. But that really is one of the reasons I do this. But I'm going to do a show, a monthly show, also on Black labor struggles. I've been working on trying to get this done for almost a year. And because of all of the health stuff, I really just couldn't get it together. But things are kind of, smoothing out. I don't have to do any more training for dialysis. Thank God. I'm just doing dialysis, cannulating using the needles. Yeah, it's not as bad as I thought it would be. But I'm doing that now, so I'm good. And the only thing I have to deal with is I'm waiting to hear about the transplant, and that's it. So I'm going to start a new show once a month to talk about Black labor issues specifically. Excuse me. Don't know what it's going to be called yet, but I am talking to a couple of people in the Black labor sphere to have on to do that regularly. Blackonomically Speaking will still be every third Friday. So, man, that's the month, ain't it? That's the month, yo. And then, I'm going to have a People's Power Hour thrown in there, a little extra for you this show. Because what is that? That is the labor show. That is Blackonomically Speaking. That is Imprint of Imperialism. So, so thank you. For on the fourth Friday, I will either do a People's Power Hour or I will rest. So that's it. So I hope that's stuff that is interesting to you all. Thank you for that. Sounds of Saint Elsewhere. This is why I wanted to really focus on this Black labor thing, because I am hoping to get some Black members of the Teamsters Union on here. I'm trying to work on some stuff. So I'm also trying to get Dr. Gerald Horn back on the show. I had him scheduled earlier before the surgery, but things went the way they did. So I'm going to try to get him back on just to talk his talk, because I love Dr. Horn. And that's it. So that's all I got. Y'all, thank y'all so much for hanging out with me tonight on People's Power Hour. I hope I learned something. I hope I did not run the person off forever. I apologize for taking you out of context. Please forgive me. As human, I fuck up sometimes too. But it's all love. I appreciate you very much. as usual, folks, no matter what it is we're talking about, I don't care what it is we're talking about. A luta continua. The struggle continues. I don't care what these people do. The struggle continues. But I promise you, if we organize, if we're serious about it, if we commit to it, and if we do not stop, Victoria asserta. Victory is certain. So y'all take care of yourselves. Peace.